Hey guys, this is Chris again with CW Builds, and today we have a little bit different kind of video for you. This is my 2005 Lincoln Town Car, and I'm going to be showing you how to change both the front and rear pads and rotors. Starting with the rear, we're going to go to the back. And on the back of this caliper, there's two bolts you need to know. There's one here, and there's one right here. They're both 10 millimeter, and you need to remove those first. Of course, after removing the wheel itself. Alright, got my 10 millimeter socket, and I'm going to do that now. Now, general practice, you want to loosen both bolts before you remove either one. And it doesn't matter as much for the rear as it does for the front, but in the front I'll be telling you to remove the bottom bolt first so the whole thing doesn't just fall off. The rear calipers are actually held in place by a spring clip, which I'll show you in just a second. Alright, got both of those out, and I'll put them to the side. Back in the front of the rotor, here's the spring clip I was telling you about, and that holds the caliper onto the car. Now we can depress that, and this whole thing should just come right off. Give it a little love. People do use pry bars to do this. I like to use my hands when I can, just to avoid damaging anything in case you slip or something else happens. And there we go. I can remove that. And I'm actually going to set this right on the control arm in here for just a minute after I remove the rear pad, because the front pad takes a little bit of working to get off. So inside here, you can see the inside pad, and that's just gonna pop right off. Now I gotta go grab my C-clamp and a couple other tools. Alright, I got the tools I need. Now, this front pad is honestly kinda annoying to get off. It's really just held on by this spring right here. You can see the caliper in the middle with a spring on this side and the brake pad on the other side. And the spring is holding tension to keep it on. Now, I'm not really sure if there is a proper way to do this per se, but a rubber mallet seems to work pretty well. So let's do that now. If you are keeping your discs, I would not recommend resting your caliper on here. You can damage it. But I am going to be changing them, so I don't really mind. Now you see I tapped it forward, and then I tapped it back, and it came right off. You can see I got a couple cinder blocks sitting right here, and that's actually just to rest the caliper on. Because I don't want to damage this brake line. I don't want it to leak. I don't want it to come off. That's just a whole nother pain that I don't want to deal with. So have something handy to put your brake caliper on after you remove the pads. Alright, now, how do we get the disc off? Well, this is the hub, and the disc is actually a part of it, as you can see when I wiggle it. Now, there's some of these cars have larger holes here, and a little kind of spin nut kind of thing that keeps them on. Mine does not have that. I can actually just tap this all the way around just to loosen it a little bit. I'm really not hitting it very hard. And then after that, you can actually just wiggle off the whole thing. And it takes a little bit of work, but it's really not hard at all. Anybody can do this at home. And you can see it's just slid right off. Now it's hard for you to see from this angle, but inside here is actually your emergency brake. And mine is pretty dusty, gross, dirty, grimy. So I'm gonna take some brake clean, spray it in there, try to get a lot of that gunk out, and I'm just gonna wipe off the outside of this as well. Unfortunately, I'm almost out of brake clean, so I might not be able to do this for the front. And you can just see the black just dripping off. Brake clean is really an amazing thing. Now you need to put on the new rotors. You can see mine are actually covered in a black thermic coating. That helps with taking the heat away from the brakes, as well as keeping rust from forming in places that the pads don't touch, such as the hub, the edges, and the inside and the edge. So now we are just actually going to slide these right on. You gotta find the whole alignment. There it is. Slide it all the way back till it's snug and secure. Pretty easy, right? Now we gotta put on our new brake pads. This is going to be your inner brake pad. You can tell because it has the spring clips that look like this, which basically holds inside of that piston. So we're gonna take our brake caliper. Here's, oh, actually I missed a step, hold on. So you see how this this piston is still kind of out a little bit. It's kind of hard to see, but maybe from that angle. I'll actually keep it like this while I show you how to fix that. You're gonna take a C-clamp, put it right there on the edge of the, sorry, it's kind of hard to do with one hand. Right on the edge of that piston, and we are going to slowly tighten this down. And I say slowly because as you're pushing this in, you have to remember that you are building pressure within the brake system. In this caliper, there is fluid, which activates your brakes when you push the pedal. I could explain it to you, but there's much better videos on YouTube to explain it. So basically, we just want to use a C-clamp to push that back in and make it flush with where it's supposed to be. Now, what I was saying before, so I really shouldn't be resting it on the bolt. There we go, on the edge. As I was just saying before, you want to do this slowly because each time you turn a C-clamp, you're building pressure inside of here, and you have to give that a minute to seep back into the system, or else it gets really hard. Alright, that's pretty much flush. I can take the C-clamp off now. And in just a second, I'll show you what the flush looks like. Alright, there we go. You can see that this piston is not sticking out anymore. It's actually fairly flush with the rest of the caliper. So, we're going to take our new brake pad. Let's move the light a little bit so you can see this better. Here's a new brake pad, caliper. We're actually just going to stick it right in there. Sorry, I actually have to be looking at it to do this. There we go. And it's on. Now we take our outside brake pad, which you remember is the one with the funny clamp on it, and in the middle, funny clamp in the middle, and the spring on the outside. And we're gonna slide that right onto there. And you can take a mallet and just lightly tap it on to help you get it started. But mostly you just want to do it by hand. It's really not that hard. Now you'll see it snap in just like that. Alright, now to put the caliper back on, you want to stick the top in there first. Remember, you get that spring clamp down here. And there's a boot on the back side, which I'll show you in a minute, that you want to push back a little so it doesn't impact the caliper as it's going on. And that'll help you slide it on easy without damaging the boot. And you do the same for the bottom. Move that boot and slide the caliper on past the spring. Pretty easy, right? Now we take our 2 bolts from earlier. Make sure those same holes are lined up. You might have to do a little wiggling to get it perfectly in line, and then we just screw them back down. Before I finish screwing that down, let me show you those boots I was talking about. So behind here, there's a boot for the bolt we took out. There's a boot on this side and a boot on this side. And you want to squish that boot in when you're trying to slide this back on so the boot doesn't impact this part right here. And I know it's hard to see, I know it's blurry. I'm really sorry about that. But there's another one on the bottom right here. Same thing, you want to squish that over and then slide the caliper on. Now we just need to tighten those bolts back down with our 10mm socket. One. And 2. Now, you see the caliper is secure, the disc is secure, and if you listen to this, you can actually hear my brake pads rubbing against the caliper when they really shouldn't be. That's a sign that there's some other brake maintenance that needs to be done. I'm not familiar with it, so when that, probably I'll let it get a little bit worse, but not too long, and I'll take it to a brake shop or my regular auto mechanic and let them take care of that. But there we go. That's the back. Now we move to the front, and just in case you didn't already know how to do this, I thought I'd show you. To get the wheels off of a 2000, I believe, 3 to 2011 Lincoln Town Car. Mine is a 2005 again. In order to get the wheels off, first you have to remove this cover. So you take your flathead screwdriver, the jack set that comes with the car, also the back end of the lug nut wrench that comes with it has a pry tool for this, but a flathead screwdriver works just as well. You're going to stick it in that hole there and just pry it off, and you have to go around a little bit. Whole thing pops off. Now you can see here I've actually already loosened these nuts, but you're just going to spin them off, and when you're loosening or tightening nuts, you always want to go in a star pattern. And this is a Daisy. She decided to come out, say hi. I think she wants to help teach everybody how to do this. She's a very, very sweet doggo. And she just wants to be as close as she can to Dad. So it's a little hard to keep her in focus. But she just wanted to come say hi to everyone. Now back to what we were doing. The nuts are all off. We're going to remove the wheel. Actually, let me get my gloves real quick. There we go. Try to keep your hands a little bit cleaner. Now I just pull the wheel off and we're going to wheel it right out. Now you might notice The front calipers look a little bit different from the rear ones, and the discs are also different. The hub is quite a bit smaller on the front, and instead of a 1-piston brake caliper, these front calipers are 2-piston, and they actually fasten a little bit different. It's not too much different if you're just changing the pad, but it's an extra step if you're changing the disc, because you actually have to remove this piece as well. To get the main part of the caliper off, there are 2 bolts again. There is one located right here, and one located right here. These are, I believe, 14 millimeters, and I will check that right now with my 14 millimeter socket. Perfect fit. Okay. So this nut bolt right here has actually been rounded off, so I'll have to get a different tool to get that off, but we can get the bottom one off. Which works out because we actually want to get the bottom one off first. These bolts are much shorter than the rear ones. Might be hard to tell because I'm spinning so long, but I think the bolt was actually out for a little while there. It just wasn't sliding out like I thought it was going to. That's alright. The second thing is, it's kind of hard to see in here, but it looks like it's showing up in the camera. Let's see, find my flathead to point at this for you. You can actually see that there's quite a bit of room in here, and that's because this piston is stuck out, just like the back was, which is going to make it very hard to get this off, the caliper off, because the caliper is going to actually catch on the brake pad. So, what we do is we take our C-clamp again. And if you're doing this on the driver's side, don't be alarmed. When you depress these 2-piston calipers, you're gonna squirt some brake fluid out the top of the reservoir, and so you're gonna see fluid dripping down. That's okay, not a huge deal. All right, don't worry about it. But we're gonna take the C-clamp and we're going to use it. You can see this side of the C-clamp is on the back of the caliper, but it's not actually touching this brake line or connector because we don't want to damage that. And then the front side is actually on the brake pad, which I'll show you here. See, it's actually in there on the brake pad. I know it's a little blurry, but you can see it. I'm going to try to keep this in focus for what we're doing right now. And we're just going to slowly tighten this down because we want to compress the brakes. We want to push that piston back inside of the caliper, which will help us a lot when it comes to taking this main part off. I'm trying to hold the back of the caliper in place while I do this so it doesn't just slip off. And while I'm doing this, I can actually show you down here on the other side, the fluid is indeed dripping out. Alright, now as I tighten this, I bet you some fluid's going to start dripping over there. Alright, the front one is fully depressed. Now I'm going to stick the C-clamp on the bottom side. And after I'm done, I'll show you where I place it. But I want to get the bottom piston depressed as well. Alright, now on this side you can see I place the back of the clamp right here on the back of the caliper. And again, the screw part of the clamp against the pad. I'm going to take that off. But now we run into our problem of this rounded off bolt. So how do we get that off? Well, there's different ways. You could grind it off on two sides, and then so you have a large flat surface on both sides, and then use an adjustable wrench, or if it just happens to fit a size of a regular wrench, you could use that. You could, if you break the bolt head off and it's just completely gone, you need an extractor kit. But for this use, I am going to use a bolt and nut remover set, which looks like this. Pretty simple looking thing. Now first I need to find the right size, which should be 14 millimeter. See if I have one in here. Yep, 9/16 is 14 millimeters. They are one and the same. So you see I put the remover on the back of that nut. And let's actually zoom in on this. There we go. So here's the nut. It's rounded off. The socket won't grab it. So I've got the remover. I'm going to set it on right there. Then I'm going to take my hammer. I'm going to tap that on. Doesn't have to be real hard or anything. Just enough to get it on there. And then I'm actually going to take my wrench. This nut remover is actually going to dig into the metal of the nut and help it spin right off. And you can see this is why we remove the bottom bolt first, so that this whole thing wouldn't just flop off. And actually I'm going to stick the bolt back in the bottom just to help us get some leverage on this top one. Now I don't have to screw this in tight because we're not going anywhere. We just want it to get a little hold. And there we go. It works like magic. Now this bolt should be replaced, but unfortunately this is my only car right now. My girlfriend's at work, and I don't have another car. This is my daily driver, and if you're looking for a cheap daily driver, I highly recommend a town car. You can get one between $5,000 and $10,000 in very good shape. Always take a car that you're purchasing though to a mechanic for a pre-purchase inspection. Alright, now that this nut is off, we need to remove this one again while holding this in place so it doesn't just fall off and damage the brake line or the caliper. Remove that nut, and this whole caliper should just come right off, and it does. I'm going to set the caliper on my cinder blocks so that it doesn't hang and damage the line coming from it. And now we can just pull these pads off. They come right out. Now to remove this, there are two more larger bolts which are 18 millimeters. First one is here, and the second one is here. And these can be very hard to get off. A lot of times they will have seized on, and you may need some lubrication some penetrating oil. You may need to use heat. For the front set, I actually had to heat it up. You can do this with a blowtorch, which I don't really recommend. I don't like the idea of my garage burning down. You can also use the heat gun, which is what I did. So let's see if this is just going to come off or if we're going to have to force it. Looks like we're going to have to force it. So I'm actually going to start with the hammer. I'm going to tap these bolts. And tapping these bolts is going to help knock away loose dust. It may even loosen the bolts themselves. Then I'm going to spray them with some penetrating oil. And now last, I'm going to take my heat gun on the high setting, being careful not to melt any boots or rubber pieces that are around this. But I'm going to use the heat gun to heat up the bolt. Now we all know that metal expands when it's heated, and that slight expansion between the hole that the bolt is threaded into and the bolt itself can actually help free the bolt from any corrosion that may have happened. Now you're not trying to make the bolt red hot, mind you. You're just trying to get it hot enough, which is hard to tell. I'll probably heat this up for a couple minutes and then try my luck with a hammer and the socket wrench again. Alright, now that that's heated, let's take the socket again. Here we got our socket wrench. Let's move this over a little bit. Alright, now that that's moved out of the way, we'll take our socket again. And see if we can just man this bolt off, and it worked. Didn't even have to use a hammer. Bolt just came right out after a little heat. Now it's possible the bolt was actually loosened by the hammer tapping or the penetrating oil, but based on the other side that I did before this, I highly doubt that. Now we don't have to remove that bolt all the way. We can just leave it there in the socket. And now we're going to heat up this one. Actually, just to test it out, let's see. Nope, that's not budging at all. So back to the heat gun. Now you have to find a way to shoot this that is not going to damage anything else. And you can see right next to this bolt, there's this rubber boot here on this joint. So I'm trying to be very careful not to touch it with the heat gun and to keep the heat coming from the heat gun directioned away from that. Let's go ahead and give that a try. And that's all it took. The bolt's coming off nicely now. Turn off that heat gun. And now you can see this is actually loose already. So I'm going to hold that down while I'm loosening the bolt, just to keep it from like falling on my foot or whatever. And there we go. This whole piece just comes right off. Well, thankfully, now that that piece is off, the disc should just slide right off with a little wiggling. Alright, now we want to put our new disc on. Line up the hole, slide it all the way back. I'm going to hold that on. And we're going to take this piece and slide it right back where it was. Which can be, it can be a little trouble, but nothing too bad. You want to line up the holes and just hand thread one in. Alright, that one's in. Let's get this one in. Alright. Those are hand threaded in. Now we can tighten them down. Now, when you're tightening down bolts, you don't just want to crank one of them down super hard all the way until you get them both mostly screwed in all the way. You can screw them in all the way, but you don't really want to torque it down until they're both there. A lot of times it's actually easier to tighten it by hand for part of the way, and then to finish it off with your socket wrench. Alright, that one's down all the way. Now that they're both in all the way, I'm torquing down the bolts. I'm actually going to get some leverage on it by standing over it. And that should be good. Next up, we need to put the new brake pads in. So get out our new brake pads. The brake pads for the front, inner and outer are actually both the same. Round side goes with the round side of the disc. You're going to stick the bottom in first and then slide the top in. There's a little spring here. You want to push that back and then slide it in. Just like that. So put the bottom in. We're going to push this back into that spring. Right there, and then slide the pad in. Just like that. Then we can take our caliper, which I put off to the side. Looks like our pistons may have come out a little bit, but that's alright. I think we can wiggle it on. Yep, just like that. Lining up the holes in the caliper with the holes in the boots, which in turn go into here. And take our two bolts again. Now, unfortunately, my camera battery died while I was putting this back together, and missed some stuff. But as I was saying, this is the spring I was talking about when you're putting the brake pad back in. You want to use the top of the brake pad to push that back a little and then slide it in. It's kind of a one motion thing, but it makes it a lot easier than just trying to shove it in. So just use the pad to gently push this back and slide the pad in like that. Then you put the caliper back in place, replace this bolt and the rear bolt. Get them both screwed in all the way, and then torque them both down, and that's it. You've replaced the discs and you've replaced the pads. Now the only step left we have is to put the wheels back on, and we're done. So let's get that done. Now let's get that wheel back on. It's easier to do if you're sitting in front of it. It gives you a little leverage over the wheel and tire to lift it up and turn it a little bit, just to get the studs lined up with the holes in the wheel. Just like that. Now I'm going to hold it in place on the bottom and on the top while I thread on the lug nuts by hand. Now keep in mind, these lug nuts are not the same on both sides. One side is rounded, and the rounded side is the one that you want going into the wheel. If you put the flat side into the wheel, you're really gonna just dig up the metal on your wheels, and it's not a fun time. Nobody wants to damage their wheels, so make sure you're putting the round side in. Now right now I'm not too worried about using a star pattern. I'm not tightening these down really tight. But when I do that in just a second with the socket wrench, I definitely will be using the star pattern. Alright, those are in. These lug nuts use a 13/16 socket or wrench or whatever. We're gonna start here. Doesn't really matter which one you start on. Get it hand tight. Skip one, hand tight, skip one. Hand tight, skip one. Hand tight, skip one. Torque it, skip one. Torque it, skip one. Torque it, skip one. Torque it, skip one. And you're just going to keep doing that until none of them go in any further. Now that the wheels are on nice and tight, I'm actually going to lower the car so that I'm not worried about this tire and wheel spinning like this, and I'm going to crank these down even more. I lowered the other side. I brought my rolling trolley jack over here. Lift it up just a little bit, enough that I can get these jack stands out. And I can lower this side of the car as well. All right. Now again, with the star pattern, we're really going to crank these. Alright, they're done. We're going to take the lug nut cover, which has just one little plastic bit that's not attached to the ring right here. It's a little bit longer and farther out than all the rest of them. And that goes not in this little divot, but this big divot that goes all the way in. We're gonna stick that in right there. And then you're done. Now before we take this out on the highway to take our girlfriend to dinner or go have lunch with her mom and whatnot, I recommend taking your car down the street. You don't have to brake super hard, but just drive normally and make sure that everything's buttoned up and working correctly and that the car's not going to fall apart. You'd much rather have to drive into your neighbor's bushes than into a car on the highway because your brakes fail. So let's do that now. Now, last but not least, I want to give you guys some words of warning. Anytime you put new discs on your car, mine had the black thermal coating, which the supplier specifically said, do not wipe it off. This is supposed to be on there. It's not any kind of grease or anything, so don't remove it. But a lot of brake discs come with some kind of coating to keep them from rusting and shipping. And you actually do want to remove that with some brake cleaner and some wipes, some microfibers before you put them on, or it'll just grease up your brake pads. Secondly, because this is a town car, it has air ride in the back. In any town car that has an air suspension, there's a switch in the trunk, and you have to turn that air suspension off before lifting the car, or you risk blowing your airbags as it expands. Lastly, I'm not any kind of mechanic or even an apprentice. I'm just a guy that likes to, I'm just a guy that likes computers, honestly, and I like to work on my cars. And there weren't many very good videos online on how to do this, so I thought I'd share it with you. There was one pretty good one by an African American gentleman. I'll actually link his channel in the description of this video. But I think he only showed either the front or only showed the back, and I wanted to show both in one video with good. I don't know, to just make it look good so you could really see what was happening. That's all I have for you guys today. I really appreciate you watching this video. I hope it really helped you guys out. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them down below. And if I have the answers, I'll definitely get right back to you. Thanks so much and have a great week.